There once was a man with a blade. Through jungle and desert he played. He hacked off a tail to make a chain mail from the flying T-Rex that he slayed. Hey guys, James here again, and this time I want to talk about Monster Hunter Rise, an action RPG developed by Capcom. I know I'm a bit late to the party since this game was released back in March 2021, but man, all I gotta say is, wow. This was my first Monster Hunter game ever, despite having had a couple of different Monster Hunter games on my wishlist for a while now. And like many other YouTubers who've talked about this game, I have to admit, I'm wildly addicted to it, and in just my first week, I essentially worked a second full-time job playing Monster Hunter. If I had to compare this game to other games, I'd say it's like you took the combat of a Dark Souls game and then made it so that all you do is slay giant monsters in these crazy boss fights. Then, you make weapons and armor from their skin and bones, which allows you to hunt stronger monsters, and subsequently make even better weapons and armor. Without further ado, let's dive into this. So right off the bat, the game puts you into character creation. This is actually pretty in-depth and has a ton of options, although, to be honest, when changing some of the sliders, I feel like I couldn't really notice any clear differences. Regardless, it's a high-quality character creation mode. This character creation even extends to pets. In Rise, you can create one dog called a Palamute and one cat called a Palico. These guys are great and really cute and help provide a ton of support as you go on hunts. Once you finish creating your character, you're then thrown into Kamura Village, a quaint little town with danger looming ahead. You find out you're the newest monster hunter in the village, and as such, you must help Kamura Village prepare for the Rampage, a gathering of numerous monsters which threaten to destroy the village. One of the first things you should do in the game is pick a weapon. In Monster Hunter, there are 14 different weapon types, and each weapon type essentially corresponds to a different class. Each weapon is pretty different, with different attacks, combos, special moves, and mechanics at your disposal. Me personally, I ended up playing with dual blades, which are quicker and a bit hack and slashy by nature, as well as the hammer, which is much slower, but also capable of massive hits if timed correctly. Each weapon will also have what's called switch skills, which you can swap between based on your preferred style of play. I won't dive into all of the weapons, but just know that you have a ton of options here, and each one will make your experience a little bit different. Next, you're sent through some basic tutorial missions to get you used to the combat and movement. Throughout a lot of the early game, you're going to get a lot, and I mean a lot of different tutorial screens which will try and explain different mechanics and systems to you. While I do appreciate the effort, my big complaint around these tutorial screens is just how useless they really are. For one thing, they try to explain everything to you with walls of text and maybe a picture here or there, and this can be helpful, but these often don't really help give context behind what they're explaining, so they'll give you some information which you'll read and pretty much immediately forget. Not to mention, they also interrupt you quite a lot in the beginning, and so overall, I think the tutorials are probably one of the worst parts of the game, and one of the biggest barriers to entry. I really feel like they could have explained some of this stuff way easier, or even just let players figure things out on their own, because honestly, after a few hunts and talking to people around town, you start to realize how simple everything actually is. You eventually start doing real quests, and these quests are split into two areas. First, you have village quests, which are for your single player campaign. Then, you have hub quests, which are for multiplayer, but are also playable solo and will be more difficult than village quests. For each area, you start off at 1-star quests, and by beating a certain number of required quests, as well as an urgent quest boss battle, you can then move up other ranks and fight different monsters. In general, quests will take on one of three forms. The first type is the fetch quest, which might require you to collect a certain amount of an object on the map. These can also include missions where you need to slay a certain amount of small monsters. In general, these missions are pretty whatever. Honestly, probably not worth your time, but I guess it's a nice option to have if you're struggling to beat standard monster hunting quests, or if players need to collect or slay a specific thing. The second type of quest, as I just mentioned, are monster hunting quests. These are the bread and butter of the game, so let me try my best to explain the flow of how one of these quests goes. To start one of these quests, you accept a contract to hunt a specific monster. Then, before you depart, or even during the quest, you're able to prepare yourself for the hunt. This includes choosing your weapons and armor, choosing your animal pals, grabbing items you might need for the hunt, and eating bunny dangos, which are these mochi-like things which have chances of granting you certain bonuses. Then, you depart to the actual map. In Monster Hunter Rise, there are a couple of different maps with their own unique ecosystems and topologies. These include foresty ruins, a desert, a jungle, a volcano, a snowy area, plus some others for specific missions. You spawn in at the main camp and then send your owl friend, called a Kahoot, to perform reconnaissance. The Kahoot will scan the area and let you know the locations of the major monsters, with there usually being around 3 on the map at any given time. You then trek through the map and try to hunt your target down. Along the way, you're likely to find some different loot and endemic life which you can collect. Interacting with these things on the map will give you different materials which you can use to craft and upgrade things to help you on hunts. Some of the endemic life you encounter can also give you buffs or other useful items, but some of these will only last for the current quest. Then, you finally make it to your target and you can finally engage the monster. This is the perfect time for me to talk about the combat. Like I mentioned before, the combat is slightly reminiscent of a Dark Souls game. What I mean by this is that the combat in the game tends to lean more slow and methodical. Of course, this will depend on the weapon class you chose, but in general, the combat in the game is very much focused around timing, animations, and positioning. Your attacks, and heck, even just drawing your weapon, can have lengthy animations to them, and thus require some commitment. Monsters in this game are usually large, hulking beasts with big, powerful moves, some of which can be capable of one-shotting you if you're not careful. Even so, every monster has tells and animations which happen to let you know that an attack is coming. Each monster is pretty different with their own moves, behaviors, and weaknesses, and I think there's a great variety where no two monsters really feel the same to fight against. I love the monster designs across the board, and it's always a joy and surprise to learn the different things that each one brings to the table. Because of the combination of the big, strong monsters and the slow-paced combat, this means that the game is very much about learning the nuances of your weapon and combos, as well as learning the different behaviors and tells of monsters. As such, combat revolves much around you identifying incoming attacks, dodging them, and then positioning yourself to punish the monster once you have a good opening. This slower paced combat can be difficult to get used to at first, but becomes so satisfying once things start to click. You'll have a bunch of near-death experiences and plenty of other crazy moments, and it's just so satisfying to land a big shot or your full combo on a monster. Probably the biggest issue with the combat though would have to be the camera. It's not bad by any means, but sometimes you might need to make some compromises. They have two camera modes, a classic mode and a locked-on camera. The locked-on camera will lock onto a monster that you specify, but I had an issue with this camera when facing some of the faster monsters. The classic camera on the other hand requires much more manual tweaking as a result, although you might not always be able to follow the things that you want. Both have their pros and cons. You also have a couple nice little tricks up your sleeve to help you with your hunts. First, you have your pets. Your dog is your loyal steed. You can jump on its back and ride around the map much quicker than you would by running. While on your dog, you can heal up and sharpen your weapon, which dulls through use, and this can be especially useful against faster and harder enemies. When in combat, your dog will also help attack the monster and distract it from you. Your cat, on the other hand, is your utility belt. They'll help you gather extra materials as you run around the map. They can also use different spells which do a variety of things like deal damage, heal, trap monsters, and more. Pets in general are super useful, and by default in single player you bring one cat and one dog, but you can actually mix and match as you please. Keep in mind though that in multiplayer you can only bring one pet with you. The game also lets you be Spider-Man by using an item called a wire bug. You naturally have two of these guys, but you can get a third one for a limited time by collecting more while on the hunt. With these guys, you can sling and swing around the map to traverse it with ease, even allowing you to run along walls. My only issue was how sometimes the wall run would be a little bit inconsistent, where I try to jump onto a wall, but then my character just starts running horizontally instead of vertically like I'm pressing on my controller. In combat, you can use wire bugs to close the distance on monsters or retreat to safety. Every class also has what's called wire bug attacks, which are special attacks that can cause some pretty serious damage. If you do enough damage to a monster, especially wire bug damage, you might even be able to ride on the monster. Riding on a monster allows you to run around the map and throw the monster at walls to break off those tasty parts. If another monster happens to wander nearby, you might also have a turf war, allowing you to use the monster you're riding to smash the other. While I do think the system is fun and probably the best way to get monster materials, I did find that sometimes the AI for these encounters would be a little bit weird. In particular would be cases where a dude might come in, seemingly want to start a fight, but then run away immediately. I also did think that sometimes initiating a monster riding sequence would be too easy, and often it just felt like a tool that presents itself to you almost immediately, rather than something you had to work to earn. These fights can be no joke though. In general, unless you and your team are really on top of your game, the fight will have multiple phases. This is because once the monster takes enough punishment, it will try to flee from you, forcing you to chase it. While this can be a bit annoying at times, this bit of respite is also really pivotal to the pacing of the game. As the fights drag on, the monsters will get more tired and take significantly longer in between attacks. At the same time though, this often makes the monster more desperate, with their attacks becoming more dangerous and wild. I really love this part of the game, and the behaviors the monsters exhibit really help to make them feel like living creatures. The monsters have some pretty crazy moves, and you can see a lot of the inspiration they might have pulled from the animal kingdom. Once monsters get weak enough, you can either kill them or capture them. You'll potentially get different rewards based on which approach you pick, although capturing grants some additional materials. To capture a monster, you need to make sure they're weak enough, then you set up a trap for them, and once they fall into it, you run up and put them to bed. I really enjoy these hunting missions, and there's just something about them which is so satisfying. Like I mentioned before, the combat is just so nice, and being able to figure out the different monsters presents a challenge in itself. I think another thing which makes these quests so enjoyable is the almost ritualistic nature of the prep and scavenging. The maps in the game stay consistent across all quests, and so the location of different loot and endemic life won't change. As such, as you slowly memorize the maps, you also develop your own paths to loot for items, and it just helps to add the satisfying feel of mastery. One thing to keep in mind though is that these fights can sometimes be long affairs. Every quest has a 50-minute time limit, but that's actually more than enough time to complete quests. While low rank missions can sometimes be completed in 5 to 10 minutes, the high rank missions can sometimes take 15 to 20 plus minutes, but that really depends on your gear and skills. Even so, I did find that any individual quest was bite-sized enough that I do feel like Rise is a solid game to grab and play when you have a quick 30-minute break or something. Something I do want to point out though is that in general, single player feels like a different game from multiplayer, although this can depend on your teammates and the weapons they chose. Single player to me always felt significantly scarier because you're the only one who can really perform and receive damage. Multiplayer games on the other hand tend to feel a bit more chaotic, especially with a full group of 4. To me, multiplayer quests usually felt like the team was just laying a smackdown on the monster. Sure, we'd have deaths here and there, but I think a lot of those came from us playing riskier because we're in a group over anything else. Something to note also is that the game supposedly will balance itself based on how many players are in a quest, giving more power and health to the monsters as you add friends. For me personally though, I did feel like sometimes some of these missions were just a tad too easy, and I would have liked if it was a little more difficult. But, either way I still had fun. In addition to these hunting quests, you also have rampage quests, which are essentially this tower defense mode where you need to fight off hordes of monsters. You spawn into a map with a bunch of platforms where you can place different towers. This includes different automatic and usable defensive structures which you can use to help to fight off enemies and keep them from breaking into the village. In my opinion, while I did think that these rampage quests could actually be pretty fun and a great way to get a ton of rewards, in my experience playing them solo can be quite difficult, and since you need to run around managing things everywhere, it often feels not nearly as fun as playing these missions in a group. They also have arena and challenge quests, which are different quests that put you in specific situations with different armor or weapons. These will usually have a set time you need to try to beat the quest within in order to get the best rating and rewards possible. They've also been adding a variety of event quests to the game, and recently they even announced that there should be a new event quest added to the game every week. Not only that, but there's also plenty of side quests throughout the game as well. After every mission you complete, you get different rewards such as gold, Kamura points which can be spent on various things in town, materials which can be used for crafting, as well as materials needed to forge and upgrade your weapons and armor. This whole loop of fighting to collect materials and then using the materials to craft things for yourself is crazy addicting, especially as you try to figure out the different types of weapons and armor builds you can put together. Honestly, that's most of the gameplay in a nutshell. Back at Kamura Village, you essentially have a hub where you can do a number of things to help you on hunts. As mentioned, a big part of the game is visiting the blacksmith to forge different weapons and armor. Just about every monster you kill, big or small, will have a weapon or armor corresponding to it. These weapons can do different types of elemental or status damage, such as thunder damage, poison damage, and more. As for the armor, there are usually 2 sets of armor corresponding to each monster, one for low rank and one for high rank. The high rank armor can't be earned until you hit Hunter rank 4, and these usually consist of rare materials. The great thing about armor is that they also grant you different skills which can be useful in the hunt. High rank armor will give you more armor as well as more or better skills than their low rank counterparts. A huge part of the game is honestly just figuring out the different equipment combinations and builds you can use. I think a good chunk of my playtime is honestly just me sitting in front of the smithy, theory crafting a nice synergistic build for me to try and obtain next. I think the actual designs of the armor are pretty wild too, although some are a bit ridiculous. Here you can even build different weapons and armor for your pet, which is super cute. My main issue around the armor and weapons is honestly just the grind. If you watch my video on progression, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of having to grind in games, and to an extent, I feel the same way here. Since there are different odds of getting certain materials, grinding can be unavoidable. Add in the fact that you have high rank and low rank separation that you might end up doing a lot of the same fights over and over again. Thankfully, in high rank, monsters will whip out different moves, and I think the combat and game loop is engaging enough where I have no problem doing these fights, especially since I could try out different weapons or play quests with friends to help them keep fresh. In town, you have a variety of different merchants and services at your disposal. At the merchants and smithies, you can craft different jewels and decorations which can help give you new skills. Additionally, you're able to hire more animal buddies to help you on your journey. You can even send your buddies to training and some special areas where they can passively gather resources for you, such as the Meowcenaries and the Argosy. And real quick, here's a couple other things I wanted to call out. First, I really like how easy traveling around Kamura Village is, especially with the quick travel mechanic. I also like how they have multiple areas for you to prep, so no matter where you are in town, you're able to quickly get geared up if you need. I think the practice area they have in the game is really solid as well, although I do wish they would give you more combo details. I also just want to shout out the map design. Each map feels quite different and there are a bunch of cool little areas scattered throughout them. I also like the verticality of the maps, which makes sense with the addition of the wire bugs. Most places have multiple levels you can explore, and I thought that was cool. I also really appreciate the amount of effort that goes into the knowledge base for the game. Even though the tutorials suck, the game presents you with plenty of notes and pages for you to learn about the monsters and other parts of the game, and they really made this information easily accessible. Finally, I also wanted to praise some of the little special cutscenes that they have playing before every new monster you meet. Every time I saw one of these cutscenes, I felt hyped and maybe even slightly scared of the monster I was about to see. In terms of the story of the game, it's kinda whatever. To be honest, I never paid too much attention to it. It was kinda cliche, but I think most people aren't playing Monster Hunter for the story. Then, with regards to the technical aspects, I'm actually really impressed with how the game looks. Especially considering the fact that Switch hardware is extremely old now, it's crazy that they're able to get the game looking so good. There can be some slight dips in performance here and there, but nothing so bad that I felt like it was ever unplayable. For the most part, I also really like what Monster Hunter brings to the sound department as well. The music is great all throughout and has a very cinematic adventure feel to it. I also love the sound effects and think every hit is made even more satisfying because of it. My biggest complaint in this area is probably the voiceovers, where the English ones were kinda whatever to me, and I eventually switched to Monster Hunter language, which is a version of Japanese Simlish. I'm really trying to think of issues I have, and outside the ones I called out before, honestly, there isn't anything too serious. There's going to be some small things here and there that you might notice, but for the most part, the whole experience is really smooth and really well thought out. One complaint I've heard from Monster Hunter vets is the lack of content, especially endgame content. But the way I look at it, the game easily gave me 50 hours in my first week of playing alone, and even now that I've gotten past Hunter rank 7, I feel like there's still quite a bit for me to go. Heck, to me, even if you just cut out all the high rank parts, it'd still feel worth the price of admission, although I understand that experienced players might have a different view. Overall, I love Monster Hunter Rise, and I'm putting it as one of my early contenders for my game of the year. It was so good that I'm honestly contemplating getting World on PC and playing that as well. For me personally, I think it's easily worth the $60 price tag, and Capcom has made a fan out of me. But hey, that's just me. Feel free to let me know down below what you think. Have you tried Monster Hunter Rise, and what'd you think of it? If you made it this far, I just want to say I appreciate you checking out the video. If you enjoyed it, please do consider hitting that like or subscribe button, as it really helps my channel grow and motivates me to make more and better videos. And as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.